Alright guys, I'm going to try something new here. My name's Eric Paulette. I'm the owner of Bitter Pill Customs. Not only do I do custom work on vehicles, I work on them all the time too. Here's a 2012 Buick Enclave with a starter problem. And by problem I mean this is the second one I've put in it. So I'm going to show you how to properly take it off without having to throw things and kick stuff and everything else like that, because it ain't easy. So here we go. The first issue is its location. It's the front of the motor right behind the exhaust. You can kind of see the tip of it there, that little shiny piece right there. That's the edge of the starter. Unfortunately, in order to get to it and remove it, you have to remove all the exhaust components and things like that. So I'll show you the easiest way to do that. Like you normally do on anything you have to work on, you got to take off the plastic piece of shit that means absolutely nothing, but hey, it does tell you what motor's in there. Again, this is the only option for this vehicle, so AutoZone should not ask you that question, but I guarantee they will. First thing you have to do is unplug the O2 sensor so you can take the first shroud off. See the O2 sensor sticking out here, and then you can see the blue plug here, so this metal shroud can come off. There's 3 bolts, one in the upper left, one in the upper right, and one where my finger is on the bottom. Those are 10 millimeter. The only 3 sockets you'll need for this entire job are 10 millimeter, 13 millimeter, and 15 millimeter. Remove the 3 shroud bolts right there using the 10 millimeter 1/4-inch drive. I find this had to be a little bit easier. It's not necessary for this job, but getting in small spaces, I try to use this as much as I can. You can see, got the O2 sensor unhooked. Everything's kind of out of the way. You just kind of pull it up out of the way. Be very careful not to pull it too hard. You pull it too hard, you pull it on wires, you might unhook stuff that you don't want to unhook, because if you notice, everything in here is full of wires, so you'll need 2 hands. Now put the phone down and get it out. And there's the shroud intact. Put it next to the screws so you don't lose anything. Now the fun part for this, the exhaust bolts. These are 15 millimeter. See one here, one down there on the bottom, and one here on the bottom as well. Deep Well 15 takes care of them. Now I started at the top of the motor because these things are rusted in there really well. I suggest soaking them in WD-40 or liquid wrench or any of those products for a pretty good long time. I think I did it for about 45 minutes, and I'll show you the contraption I use to get to them. Alright guys, like I said, 15 millimeter deep well. That will definitely do the trick on 2 of them. One of the bolts is kind of screwed up. Looks like somebody tried to do it before, so I have to use a 16 on, but they should all 3 be 15 millimeter. I like to use these extensions. If you notice, the one on the left has more of a rounded edge compared to the perfectly square other one. That allows for movement, so you don't need to use another one of the swivel heads, and it doesn't misplace the torque as much. So I'll put these together here and I'll show you exactly what I mean. It's kind of an old demolition derby trick. That's how I got my start smashing cars. Now I fix them. So here's the one that's completely straight. As you can see, it does not move, doesn't bend, doesn't do anything. It's perfectly straight, just like that long one would be. And the one with that chamfer, you can see it's more of a U shape and it bends. So it gives you the ability, if you put a couple of those together, you can almost create an arc instead of a completely straight line when you have to get to stuff that is all busy and things like that. And I'll hook that up and show you. And like I said, since this is a recreation and having to do it a second time because of a crap starter, this will be a little bit easier. But you can see all the extensions I have to get the curvature that's necessary. And I got the larger one with the breaker bar. This is not necessary at this time, but when it was the first time, it was very, very stiff. Obviously, it's exhaust, so it's all fused together. You just keep pumping that stuff full of WD-40 till it gets loose, and I'll show you how I did that. Basically, using the front end as a guide to keep everything straight. Took my jack handle off, put it on there to add as a fulcrum piece. Then you just kind of use your body and you use your hips to kind of push against it and slowly go until you feel the pressure. and then back off, and then just keep kind of working it. Slowly, slowly, slowly. If you go full bore and try to just smash into it, you're going to break the bolts. You'll feel it crack loose, and they'll come out. Before you go underneath the car, the battery's behind the passenger seat. Unhook the positive post so you don't have sparks. This one is a little bit different than normal because it doesn't have a positive and negative post on the starter itself. The negative is the solenoid itself. So if you touch things with the solid being done, you'll get some sparks. I would definitely recommend disconnecting the positive cable at this time. All right, now we're underneath the car. See the exhaust here. See up through the light reverse what we were doing. Starter's right there at the end of my fingertip. You can kind of see the label on it. See how difficult it is to reach. First thing to do is these two 13mm bolts. That allows you to get this exhaust converter right out of the way and gives you access to the starter bolts. All right, you can see we got the nuts off of there, and it moves a little bit on its own. So you're gonna have to get a screwdriver to pry in between here to pry it apart. Got to be very careful because there is a donut gasket in there, which you don't want to destroy. If you destroy the donut gasket, you get it all fired up, then you're going to have an exhaust leak. You don't want that. So I'm going to go get the screwdriver, start prying it apart, and get it out of the way. All right, so I got the screwdriver in there. See it move. This kind of gives you more of like a bendy situation, so you don't want to pry up on it because it's not going to go anywhere. It's hooked onto the manifold itself, so you actually have to pry the bottom out of the way. See how that moves nice and easy like? You just gotta pry it out of the way so it gets out of the way of the bolts. Once that happens, the catalytic converter will fall right down and you can move it out of the way. Unfortunately, it takes two hands to do that, so I'll be doing that here in a second. Before you move that, you can see that 15mm bolt right behind there. That is a bracket that's hooked onto the exhaust. That 15mm bolt has to come off, and then you can move it completely out of the way. As you can see, a standard deep well should reach it, or just a regular socket and a small extension will get there. It looks like that O2 sensor's in the way, but it's really not. You can get there and undo it easy enough, and it should break loose fairly easily. The exhaust bolts, those were the 13mm, and I did end up using an impact on that because they're on there pretty good. But with some elbow grease, you can probably pull them off. All right, guys, you got that right out of the way. You can see it's much more pliable now. You can just move it with your hands. See, there's that donut I was talking about. You got to be very careful with. You just kind of got to manipulate it out of the way. I'll show you after I get it where it goes. All right, so there. Move that over to the side. There's the exhaust. You can see the gaping hole in the light now. And the starter is up here. See my fingers, that's on a bolt. I know this lighting isn't very good. I'll see if I can cover it up a little bit. And my pinky's on the other starter bolt. Again, those are the only two starter bolts. They're 15mm. There's not a lot of room to work, so you can't exactly just fly them right out. But they are easy access and they're easy to remove. So two 15mm starter bolts, just go ahead and take those out, and then we'll go from there, because there may be a hurdle, there may not be, we'll see. The reason it takes so long to get those things out is because they're 5 times longer than they need to be, but yet there they are. Now comes to the part why I'm making this video. You can see the starter's right here, and then light, terrible light. I need to block that, I think. Anyway, starter's right there with the label on it. You can see it. It doesn't appear that there's anything in the way. When you try to move it, you might get some resistance because there's a sensor directly behind the starter itself, and then right behind that sensor is the oil filter. So the last time I had to take the oil filter off to get to the sensor, to take the sensor off to get the starter out of the way. I'm hoping, since I moved the exhaust out of the way first, I can manipulate it out. We'll see. Alright guys, just like I was afraid of, you see that black thing with the red band down there? That's your oil filter. That has to come off. And just to the right of it, there is a 10mm bolt that has a sensor that sticks to the block that is directly behind the starter that will not allow you to move it. So, you have to take the oil filter off. So get your oil drain out, because it will drain a little bit. And then get your 10mm socket. Doesn't have to be a deep well, but it does need the extension, because you got to be able to reach it. And just start feeling it around, because there is no way to find it at all except for with your fingers. You can feel it. It's at the bottom of the manifold. And if you poke your head around in different directions, you can kind of see where the wires are going, but you can't actually see it. I've had it off once. It is a pain, but it's just a bolt. So here we go. So obviously you have to lower the car back down so you can get in the engine compartment, take off the oil filter, get your oil catch down there, which I've already done, so I don't need to do it again, and get your 10mm bolts in there. And get that thing out, and then get back underneath there and drop the starter. And there's only one wire on it, and I'll come back on when we got that far. So the best way to get down there, as you see, I can't see the filter anymore. I took that out. So you see the numbers on the manifold. It's directly north of that, basically. So the best thing to do is reach underneath there with your thumb until you find the hex head. Should be mixed up in some wires and whatnot. And then just try to get that 10mm on it. There really is no way to see it. So in the last video, you could kind of see it directly behind the starter. That's pretty much what we're looking for. Alright, so you can see that little sensor right there sitting on the oil reservoir, on the reservoir there. That's the bane of my existence. Let's see if I can get a better picture. There it is right there with the little plug on there. See that little 10mm? That's a 13mm. I was speaking incorrectly. It's a 13mm bolt. Bolts right into the block. I'll edit that in. But that's it there. That bolt comes free. Pull it out so we don't lose it. And this bastard right here is why the starter would not come out, just because of this. Moving that out of the way now, starter dropped out freely, just sitting right there. There's one more nut on it holding the positive cable off. Just take that off and then the starter's free. That's how you get it out. Now we've seen her drop right out. It's right in front of our hands there. You can see pretty easy access considering what it was before. There's one plug in it and one wire attached to it. So you got to take the positive wire off and make sure we delicately take the plug out to make sure it functions properly. Here's the starter. Finally got her out. There's the plug I was telling you about, and the only single end that it has. So that's pretty much it. Now it's back to AutoZone to get one that actually works.